Hello everyone, welcome to Eerie Hour. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and comment where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories like this one. Now let's begin. The Halloween decorations were already out when I moved to Cedar Heights that September. Skeletons hanging from trees, fake cobwebs covering every porch, plastic ghosts swaying in the breeze. I just signed the lease on a tiny studio apartment after my divorce was finalized. 37, starting over completely from scratch. At least the neighborhood seemed friendly. My coworker Jenna lived 2 blocks away and kept inviting me to things, trying to help me feel less alone. That's how I ended up agreeing to go to the annual Halloween block party with her group. She said it was a huge event. The whole neighborhood shutting down 3 streets, everyone drinking, laughing and dancing until sunrise. The kind of party where you could forget who you were for one night. I wasn't much of a party person anymore, but sitting alone in my half-empty apartment watching horror movies didn't sound better. Jenna promised her friends were chill, mostly people from her book club who liked wine more than chaos. The night started off normal, almost boring. We met at Jenna's house around 9. There were 5 of us total, fixing last-minute costumes and drinking cheap vodka before heading out. My outfit was simple, cat ears and eyeliner whiskers because I hadn't had the energy to do anything else. Jenna, on the other hand, looked amazing. She was dressed as a witch, wearing a long velvet dress and a real vintage hat she'd found at some estate sale. We walked over together, and even from 2 streets away, I could feel the bass shaking the ground. When we arrived, I couldn't believe how big the crowd was. Hundreds of people, maybe more. The whole area glowed under strings of lights hung between the trees, speakers blasting classic rock and pop remixes, and every house door wide open. People wandered in and out, grabbing drinks from coolers, using random bathrooms, laughing with strangers like everyone belonged to the same party. For the first time in months, I actually felt okay. Dancing in the street, sipping drinks from people I didn't know, letting go of everything for a few hours. But around midnight, everything started to feel off. That's when I realized Jenna was gone. I must have lost her when I stopped to pet someone's dog dressed like a hot dog, and she'd kept walking with the others. I spent about 20 minutes trying to find her, weaving through the crowd of sweaty pirates, fairies, and fake blood-soaked zombies. Everyone's faces blurred together, masks and makeup making them all look the same. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, 12%. When I tried calling Jenna, it went straight to voicemail. She was probably out of battery too. That's just how she was. I should have just gone home right then. My apartment was 15 minutes away, but I'd had 4 or 5 drinks and felt dizzy enough that walking didn't sound smart. I opened my ride app, but it kept freezing. Too many people trying to get rides at once. Wait times were ridiculous. 45 minutes or more, and prices had tripled. My battery dropped to 7% just from trying. I stepped away from the main party, hoping I'd get better service somewhere quieter. The music faded as I wandered down one of the side streets, darker and emptier than the rest. Most of the houses there had their lights off, owners either gone or hiding from the chaos. Then about 6 houses down, I noticed one with a carved pumpkin glowing faintly on the steps. Its candle flickered inside, making the triangle eyes dance with orange light. It stood out against the darkness, a tiny spot of warmth. I figured maybe that house was still part of the block party, just calmer. Maybe I could ask to wait inside while I charged my phone for a few minutes. My battery had hit 3% now, the screen dimming as if it were trying to save itself. I knew I had maybe a minute or 2 before it shut off completely. The house looked completely ordinary. Beige paint, burgundy shutters, a porch swing creaking softly in the wind. It was so normal it almost felt unreal, like one of those houses you see in real estate ads. I knocked twice. Almost right away I heard footsteps, slow but steady, and then the door opened. A man stood there, maybe in his 50s, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. No costume, no mask. Just calm, neat, and smiling like he'd been expecting someone. His smile was warm, friendly, the kind that makes the corners of the eyes wrinkle. Before I could even explain, he said I looked lost and asked if I needed help. His voice was low and calm, too calm, but it made me feel oddly safe. I told him my phone was about to die, and I just needed to charge it for a minute to call a ride. He stepped aside right away, still smiling, and said, "Of course, come in." No problem at all. His voice had a kind of softness that made it hard to refuse. Inside, the house looked spotless, unnaturally so. Everything was cream and beige, perfectly arranged. No family photos, no clutter, no signs of anyone actually living there. Just a few landscape paintings on the walls and a bowl of decorative orbs sitting on the coffee table, perfectly centered. It felt like a model home or a stage waiting for someone to realize they shouldn't have stepped inside. The smell hit me the moment I stepped inside. A strong pine cleaner mixed with something else I couldn't quite name. It wasn't rotten exactly, but sharp and strange, almost metallic. I figured he'd probably just deep clean for the party weekend, trying to make a good impression. He walked ahead of me through the living room toward the kitchen, moving slowly like he wanted me to notice everything. Along the way, he pointed down the hall, telling me where the bathroom was, mentioning that the house had been in his family for generations, but he just recently moved back. The kitchen was spotless, so clean it didn't even look used. White cabinets without a scratch, granite countertops shining like they'd never seen a spill. He opened a drawer that looked like it belonged in a store display, perfectly organized with labeled dividers. Batteries in one section, cords in another, everything arranged neatly like no one had ever actually touched them. He took out a phone charger, plugged it into an outlet near a small table by the window, and told me to sit while it charged. He asked if I wanted water or coffee, saying it would take about 10 or 15 minutes to get enough battery for a ride. My phone lit up with 2% power, and I felt a wave of relief until I saw there were no signal bars at all, not even one. I frowned, confused, because I'd had perfect reception outside. The man didn't seem surprised. He was already at the coffee maker, pressing buttons and pulling out 2 mugs, not even waiting for my answer. He started humming softly, a tune I didn't recognize, while I mentioned my phone issue. He smiled like it was no big deal and said the house had thick walls, built back in the 1960s, something about lead paint and old materials blocking signals. He said I could use his Wi-Fi instead and recited the password from memory. A random jumble of letters and numbers that rolled off his tongue too easily. I typed it in as he poured coffee into 2 matching white mugs. The liquid looked almost black, darker than normal coffee, thick and oily. The Wi-Fi connected, but my phone stayed stuck at 2%. I unplugged and plugged it back in, but the number dropped to 1%. The charger light was on, yet nothing was charging. Then the screen flickered and went completely dark. My stomach sank. The battery had finally died, and suddenly the room felt too quiet. I stood up, pretending to sound casual, saying I should probably just walk home since it wasn't far, and I felt fine now. The man turned toward me slowly, setting the mug down. Steam rose from it, twisting in the air between us. His smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes changed. Not angry, just disappointed, almost hurt. He told me not to worry, that I could use his landline instead. He pointed to an old beige phone on the wall that I hadn't noticed before, its cord curled tightly. I lifted the receiver, but there was no dial tone, just a low, crackling hum like distant static. He gave a soft laugh and said it had been acting up lately, that the phone company never fixed things on time anymore. His laugh didn't match his eyes. That's when I really began to notice everything around me. There were no dishes anywhere. Not in the sink, not drying on the counter. No mail, no keys, no jacket near the door. Nothing that showed anyone actually lived here. And outside there was no sound. No echo of music, no shouting, no laughter from the party just a few streets away. Only silence. He was watching me as I looked around, standing near the hallway that led back to the front door. He wasn't blocking it, but his body was angled in a way that made it clear I'd have to brush past him to leave. Then he picked up the mug again and offered it to me, saying I should drink something warm before heading out. that the streets could get confusing at night, and I looked tired. His tone stayed friendly, but there was something underneath it, like a pressure pushing down, trying to make me agree. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of there. I forced a nervous laugh and said something about my roommate probably waiting up for me, already edging toward the hall. He stepped aside at the very last moment, but as I passed, his hand snapped out and grabbed my wrist. It wasn't hard, but it was firm, and the fake warmth in his voice slipped away as he said softly that he couldn't let me walk alone, that it wouldn't feel right. My skin crawled. I yanked my hand back and hurried toward the door. His footsteps followed. Heavy, steady, his voice calm and quiet, saying things like, "Be careful," and "It's not safe out there." The front door was locked with a deadbolt that needed a key on both sides. My fingers fumbled at the latch as he came closer. I could hear the faint sound of his breath behind me, still talking in that calm, too gentle tone. Finally, the bolt turned and I stumbled outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I didn't look back. I just ran. Down the porch steps, across the path, my shoes slapping against the pavement. I could hear him calling something behind me, words I couldn't make out, but he didn't follow past the doorway. The street was silent, eerily silent. No music, no laughter, no lights from the party, even though it was barely 1 a.m. The air felt thick and strange, and the streetlights threw yellow pools of light that seemed too far apart, like the shadows between them were alive. I speed-walked toward the main road, my cat ears falling off somewhere along the way, but I didn't care. All I wanted was distance. When I reached the party zone again, everything was loud and bright. Music blasting, people laughing, drinks spilling. It was all still happening. The man's street must have been silent for a reason. Too silent, like it existed apart from the rest of the world. I spotted Jenna about 20 minutes later near the beer pong tables, drunk, happy, completely unaware I'd been missing. Time didn't feel real anymore. I borrowed her phone to call a ride, not saying a word about what had happened because I couldn't explain it yet, not even to myself. The next morning I woke up sick, not just hungover, but truly sick, shaking, cold, remembering the smell of pine and metal, the too clean house, the coffee that looked wrong. I told Jenna about it over breakfast, describing the house with the pumpkin on the steps, and she frowned immediately. She said that street didn't have a single decorated house. She'd walked her dog there that morning and noticed how empty it was, how not one person had bothered with Halloween decorations. I insisted, so we drove there together around noon. But when we got there, none of the houses matched what I'd seen. The colors were different, the porches were different, and the beige house with burgundy shutters simply didn't exist. 3 days later, while scrolling the neighborhood Facebook group, I saw a post that made my blood run cold. Someone had shared an article from earlier that year about a man named Harold Brennan arrested after police found a woman locked in his basement for 6 weeks. The article showed his face, that same warm smile, the same wrinkled eyes, and listed his address, 1847 Sycamore Lane. My heart stopped. That was the street. But when Jenna and I had gone there, 1847 was a different house completely, white with black shutters. The comments under the post said the original house had been demolished back in August, after too many break-ins from vandals. I called the police immediately, shaking, barely able to speak. The detective checked the records and said Harold Brennan was still in custody, no bail, awaiting trial. She said maybe I'd seen someone who looked like him, that stress and fear can make our minds fill in details that aren't really there. She still took my report and said they'd have patrol cars check the area, but I never found out who that man really was, or how I walked into a house that didn't exist anymore. 2 weeks later, I broke my lease, packed my things, and left Cedar Heights. I couldn't even drive past Sycamore Lane without feeling sick. Jenna still messages me sometimes, saying the neighborhood plans to make the Halloween party even bigger this year. I never reply. Just seeing her name reminds me of that flickering pumpkin, the empty house, and that too gentle smile. I check my locks every night now, and I still can't look at a carved pumpkin without thinking of those glowing triangle eyes on the porch of a house that had been torn down 2 months before I knocked on its door. The next morning, I woke up to Jenna shaking me, her face pale as she showed me something on her phone. It was a neighborhood Facebook post about police cars on Sycamore Lane, the same street I'd been on, crowding around a beige house with dark red shutters. The post said neighbors had called the police after complaining about a terrible smell coming from the house. When officers went inside, they found signs that someone had been living there illegally. The house had been empty since February when its owner, a man named Christopher Vaughn, was arrested for false imprisonment and assault. According to the article Jenna found, he'd locked a woman in his basement for 3 days before she managed to escape. He'd been in county jail awaiting trial but was released on bail 2 weeks ago, and nobody knew where he'd gone. Police were now searching the house again, this time more carefully. By that afternoon, the local news said they'd found a hidden room in the basement, a freshly used one, with restraints bolted to the wall and claw marks on the doorframe. They didn't find anyone inside, living or dead. Just signs someone had been getting ready for another guest: bottled water, energy bars, a small chemical toilet. It looked like someone had been preparing to keep someone there for a long time. Halloween had always been my favorite holiday until 2022, when everything changed in just 3 hours. I was renting a small one-bedroom on the 4th floor of Riverside Apartments, one of those places with outdoor walkways and shaky metal railings that made noise when people passed by. My divorce had been finalized in August, and at 37, I was relearning how to live alone after 15 years of marriage. Most nights, I fell asleep watching cooking shows on my laptop, surrounded by half-eaten takeout containers and piles of work files from my accounting job. I'd been working long hours just to avoid the silence. That Halloween landed on a Monday, and the night before, I'd bought 2 bags of candy bars thinking maybe a dozen kids would stop by. Most families had already moved out that summer after the rent went up. Around 7:30, I was eating leftover pad thai, trying to decide whether I'd even bother answering the door when I heard a soft knock. It wasn't the loud, fast kind kids usually do when they're excited. It was quiet. 3 slow, evenly spaced taps. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a boy, maybe 11 or 12, dressed in an old-fashioned astronaut costume. Shiny silver fabric with a white helmet tucked under his arm. He was alone, which felt strange. Kids that age usually travel in groups on Halloween, especially in our half-empty building, where most lights didn't work anymore. His face looked sweaty and pale, like he'd been running. He kept glancing toward the stairwell as if he was being followed. I opened the door but left the chain on, an old habit from city living. He looked right at me with sharp gray eyes that didn't move the way kids' eyes do. He didn't seem nervous or distracted. His stare was too steady. "Could I have some water, please?" he asked, his voice thin and cracking. "I've been walking a while. My throat hurts." He didn't mention trick-or-treating. No candy bag, no pumpkin bucket. Just him, standing there perfectly still, except for one hand that kept tapping his fingers in a strange rhythm. Thumb to each fingertip, over and over. Somewhere behind him, I could hear other kids laughing and shouting as they ran from door to door. But this boy felt separate from all that, like he didn't belong in the same world. Despite the unease crawling up my spine, my instinct to help kicked in. I told him to wait and went to the kitchen, leaving the door cracked but still chained. The kitchen was maybe 15 feet away. I grabbed a plastic cup, filled it with cold water from the pitcher, added some ice cubes. It took less than a minute, but when I came back, the boy was gone. The walkway was empty, no sign of him in either direction. Unless he jumped 4 stories down, there was no way he could have disappeared that fast. The bag of candy I'd left by the door was still there, but it looked like it had been turned, the opening facing the other way. I stepped out onto the walkway, holding that cup of water that was already sweating in my hand. The couple in 4B had their TV blasting. Downstairs, some teenagers dressed as zombies were trading candy under a flickering parking light. Nobody had seen a boy in an astronaut suit. When I went back inside, I almost missed it. The candy bag felt the same weight, but when I looked inside, all the candy was gone. Instead, there was a single folded square of notebook paper, neat like an origami fortune teller. My door was still open, the chain dangling loose. My stomach twisted as I shut it, threw the deadbolt, and slid the extra security bar I'd added last month after someone tried to break into an apartment down the hall. The paper was regular lined notebook paper, 3-hole punched. When I unfolded it, I found a hand-drawn map of my apartment complex, shockingly accurate, labeled buildings, parking lots, even the broken playground that had been off-limits since September. My building D was circled in thick red crayon. In the margins, written neatly in pencil, were notes. Fire escape access. Ladder extends to 3rd floor. Maintenance closet unlocked Wednesdays. Camera blind spot between D and E buildings. Security patrol 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. only. And at the bottom, one final line. 4th floor corner unit. Sliding door. Standard lock. No secondary security. My heart dropped. That was my apartment. I rushed to check my balcony door. The lock was still on. The wooden dowel still wedged in the track. But for the first time, I noticed how close my balcony was to the empty unit next door. Only a few feet. Someone tall could easily step across. The railing was low enough to reach from below. I yanked the blinds shut so hard one cracked. Then I called the police, trying to explain. A boy asked for water, disappeared, left a map. The dispatcher said they'd send someone when available. But it was Halloween. They were flooded with calls. While waiting, I texted my sister in Oregon, even my ex-husband, desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't losing it. About 20 minutes passed before I remembered the line on the map. Maintenance closet unlocked Wednesdays. It was Monday night, 2 days away. Someone knew the routine here. I snapped pictures of the map with my phone, and that's when I noticed a small number scrawled in the top corner. 7. Just that. 7. Was it a countdown? A building? There were only 6 buildings in the complex. I couldn't sit still. Every noise made me jump. Footsteps outside, a door closing, laughter echoing down the walkway. Around 8:40, more kids came by, knocking and shouting, "Trick or treat!" But I stayed silent on the couch, gripping my phone. The map was spread out on the coffee table next to a baseball bat from my closet. That's when I heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching sound coming from the balcony door. Like metal dragging lightly on glass. The blinds were closed, but through the tiny gaps, I saw a dark shadow. It wasn't moving. The security light hadn't come on, which meant whoever it was had been standing there long enough for it to shut off, or they knew exactly where to stand to stay hidden. My phone showed 8:43 as I dialed 911 again, whispering that someone was outside on my 4th floor balcony, that I was alone, that I needed help. The dispatcher told me to stay calm, to stay away from the door. But the scratching stopped, replaced by the faint sound of metal clicking against metal. Someone was trying to unlock it. I froze, holding the bat, ready to bolt for the front door if the glass gave way. Then the shadow moved, and through the slits in the blinds, I saw silver fabric catching the dim light. The astronaut suit. But whoever was wearing it wasn't a child. They were tall, broad-shouldered, at least 6 feet. My body went cold. The figure lifted something and pressed it against the glass, a sheet of paper. Through the blinds, I could read the words scrawled in thick black marker, 7 days. Then the figure stepped back, climbed up toward the balcony above mine, and vanished. When police finally arrived 12 minutes later, they found scuff marks on my railing, scratches on the door, muddy footprints leading from the empty unit next door. Officer Gutierrez, exhausted from the chaos of Halloween, took photos and filled out a report, but we both knew what it meant. Someone had been planning this, watching me, studying everything, and they wanted me to know it. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Every sound made me jump. The fridge, the neighbor's cat, the wind brushing the blinds I refused to open. I called in sick, installed a doorbell camera, and contacted locksmiths for quotes. But I couldn't stop thinking about the map, about Wednesday, about the 7 days. By Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting in my car, parked where I could see the maintenance closet for Building D. At 2:17 p.m., a maintenance man came by, opened the closet with a key ring, and left it propped open while he worked on a sink nearby. Anyone could have walked in, taken photos of the keys, memorized the layout. Anyone could have been planning what came next. The man stayed there for about 40 minutes, the closet door wide open the entire time. When he finally locked it and walked away, I just sat in my car shaking. It hit me how easy it had been for someone to learn everything about this place, the layout, the patterns, the weak spots, and about me. Everyone living there thought they were safe behind their locks and chains, but they weren't. That night, Wednesday night, I packed a small bag and drove nearly 40 miles to a cheap roadside motel. I paid in cash and used a fake name at check-in, just in case. But no matter how hard I tried to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about what 7 days really meant. So on Sunday, exactly 7 days after Halloween, I decided to go back and check my apartment. From the outside, it looked exactly the same. Quiet, untouched, like nothing had happened. But when I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There was another piece of paper sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. It was impossible. I had checked every single lock before leaving. I picked it up, hands trembling. This one only had one line written on it in neat block letters. Next year, answer the door faster. I moved out that same week, broke my lease, lost my security deposit. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. A few weeks later, I heard from a former neighbor that something happened in Unit 2B. On November 7th, exactly 7 days after Halloween, there had been a break-in. A single mother and her young son lived there. They had just moved in that October. They'd gone trick-or-treating together, and while they were gone, someone had been watching their apartment. The break-in happened exactly a week later. Nothing valuable was taken, but they found strange things left behind. Hand-drawn maps of the complex, just like the one I'd found in my candy bag. Same careful lines, same detailed notes, same eerie handwriting. The family packed up and left the next morning. By December, 6 more tenants had done the same. The complex changed management in January. They put up real security cameras this time and hired actual guards instead of relying on that fake patrol car that used to do lazy loops around the parking lot twice a night. But none of that mattered to me anymore. Every Halloween since then, no matter where I live, I buy no candy. I don't open the door for anyone. I triple-check every lock before the sun goes down on October 31st. October of 2017 was supposed to be memorable for all the right reasons. There were 5 of us from state who decided to pool our money together to rent this old Victorian house about 40 minutes from campus. The plan was simple: throw the ultimate Halloween weekend party. The house looked straight out of a movie. 3 stories, a wraparound porch, and those old wooden floors that creaked even when nobody was walking on them. My roommate Blake found it online, ridiculously cheap for a 3-night rental. The owner said he just wanted someone staying there while he was out of town and didn't mind if we had people over, as long as we didn't wreck the place. He even left the keys hidden under a ceramic frog by the front door. Blake and I drove up that Friday afternoon with our friends Nathan, Carlos, and Josh, the guy from our economics class who always brought the best speakers to parties. The first weird thing happened before the party even started. We were carrying beer down the narrow basement stairs when the single bulb down there suddenly flicked on. The basement was small and damp, with old stone walls that looked centuries older than the rest of the house. Nathan joked that we'd rented a haunted mansion, making this awful ghost voice every time the light turned on. Carlos, whose dad was an electrician, laughed and said it was probably just vibrations from us walking, causing a loose wire to connect. That explanation made sense. The basement was mostly empty anyway. Just a few rusty lawn chairs and a water heater that made strange groaning sounds like it was about to die. We stacked the beer cases down there and didn't think much about it again. But later that night, when I went out to the garage for ice, I noticed the basement light was still on, even though nobody had gone down since. Saturday came, and people started arriving by mid-afternoon. By 6 o'clock, the house was packed with at least 50 people. The music was so loud the windows vibrated in their frames. Everyone was dressed up. Zombies in the kitchen doing keg stands, a group of friends in full Stranger Things costumes crowding the living room. Even Katie, a girl from my statistics class, came in this eerie plague doctor costume with a long black coat and the pointed beak mask. The whole scene was perfect. The lights Blake hung glowed orange across the rooms. Fake cobwebs hung from every doorway, and people wandered all 3 floors taking selfies on the old staircase. Around 9, when the party was in full swing, Josh said the basement light was flashing again. Not just turning on and off, but flickering wildly. We joked it was just the bass from the music shaking the wiring loose. Nobody wanted to go check it out. Katie was the first one to go missing, though we didn't realize it until much later. Her roommate Melissa found me in the kitchen around 11, looking worried. She said Katie had gone to find a bathroom almost an hour ago and hadn't come back. With how crowded the house was, I figured she'd just gotten caught up talking to someone, or maybe gone outside for air. It was hot inside, packed with people and noise. Still, Melissa was nervous. Said Katie never just vanished without saying anything. We looked around. Bathrooms, bedrooms, porch, nothing. Josh suggested maybe she was lying down upstairs. Melissa went to check, and I went back to the dining room where people were still playing beer pong. The power went out just after midnight. One moment the music was blasting, and the next there was total silence and darkness. Everyone froze, confused. Someone shouted that maybe the whole block lost power, but when I went to the window, I saw lights glowing in the houses down the street. It was only us. Blake used his phone flashlight to find the breaker box in the kitchen. At first, people laughed, thinking it was all part of some Halloween prank. But after 10 minutes with no power, the fun died fast. People started leaving, using their phones to light the way out. That's when Nathan noticed it. The basement light, still on, perfectly steady, not flickering, not dimming, just glowing brightly while every other light in the house stayed dark. Carlos decided to check it out, thinking maybe there was another breaker down there. He was gone for 5 long minutes before he came back, pale and shaking. Even in the faint glow from our phones, I could tell he'd seen something bad. He said the basement floor wasn't all concrete like we thought. In the far corner, half hidden behind the water heater, there was a section of plywood painted to look like the rest of the floor. When he stepped on it, it shifted slightly, revealing a gap beneath. We all went down together, phone flashlights cutting through the heavy darkness. The air was thick, damp, and cold. The plywood piece was about 3 feet wide. Blake knelt down, grabbed the edge, and pulled it aside. Beneath it was a narrow hole, a wooden ladder leading down into another room below the basement. The smell that rose up was sharp, heavy, and rotten. The kind of smell that tells you immediately. Something down there was not meant to be found. The air that came up from that hole was awful. Body odor, spoiled food, and something else. Something rotten and old. Nathan pointed his flashlight down, and we saw sleeping bags laid out, half-eaten food containers, and bottles filled with what looked like urine. Someone had been living down there. They'd been right beneath us the whole time we were setting up the party, walking over their hiding place again and again without knowing. Josh was the first to notice the small camera in the corner. It was barely visible, mounted high up on the wall, with thin wires running up through a hole in the floorboards. The wires led into the walls, and when we followed them with our eyes, we realized they probably connected to the basement light. That's why it kept turning on. It was motion activated. Every time someone moved upstairs, it would trigger the light down below. The person who had been living there had been watching us, studying every step we took. Blake started shouting for everyone to get out immediately. Nathan grabbed his phone and called 911, trying to explain what we'd found, but his voice kept breaking. The dispatcher asked him to calm down, to describe everything clearly. But how could anyone stay calm after finding something like that? Around 20 people were still in the house, drunk, confused, stumbling through the dark while we yelled at them to leave. Melissa was crying, asking where Katie was. That's when my stomach dropped. What if Katie hadn't just wandered off? What if the person living down there had taken her? The thought made my whole body go cold. The police arrived in about 15 minutes, but it felt much longer. 4 cars at first, then more. They forced everyone out of the house, took our statements, and began treating it like a full crime scene. A detective named Diane Fowler, with sharp blue eyes and short gray streaked hair, questioned me about everything. When we got there, when we saw the light, when Katie disappeared, they set up huge floodlights powered by generators and turned that basement into daylight. I stood in the yard and watched as officers climbed down into that secret space. One of them came back up quickly, pale-faced, whispering into his radio, and within minutes, more units and forensic teams arrived. Detective Fowler wouldn't tell us what they'd found, just said it was an active investigation. But one younger cop muttered something about photos taped to the walls. Dozens of them, all taken from that same camera's view, showing us upstairs in the living room, completely unaware that someone below was watching. They found Katie at around 4 a.m. She was alive but barely conscious, lying in another narrow crawl space that branched off from the main hidden room. It was a dark tunnel that ran under the house toward the backyard. She'd been drugged with something. The police never said what, and she couldn't remember anything after heading downstairs to look for the bathroom. The door to the basement was right next to the bathroom, and in the dark, noisy house, she must have opened the wrong one. The man hiding down there had grabbed her immediately. What haunted me most was realizing he had waited for that exact moment. He'd watched us through his camera, seen us laughing, drinking, distracted, and when the time was perfect, he acted. The police said based on the setup, the supplies, the makeshift toilet, the batteries, he had been living under that house for at least 2 weeks. His name was Walter Grayson, 43 years old, homeless for years. Detective Fowler called me Monday morning to tell me they'd caught him trying to break back into the house on Sunday night. He had actually tried to return, like he thought he still belonged down there. He lived in that house 8 years earlier when it was split into apartments. He'd made a copy of the keys back then and discovered that hidden crawl space while doing repairs himself. After being evicted, he'd begun sneaking into the house every time new renters moved in. He'd wait until they left for the day, crawl inside, live beneath them, and leave before they came back. Short-term rentals were perfect because no one knew the house well enough to notice anything strange. He'd been watching us set up since Friday, probably excited by the idea of a full house, full of people too drunk to notice or remember what really happened. What haunted me even more was what Detective Fowler told me later. They'd found his journals, years of them, filled with his handwriting, describing everyone who had ever stayed in that house. He wrote down their routines, what times they showered, when they went to bed, what shows they watched. He wrote about listening to their footsteps and learning to tell people apart by how they walked. He'd even written about sneaking into rooms while people slept, taking tiny things they wouldn't miss. A sock, a pen, a charger. He called it collecting lives. Katie had been his next collection, taken right from the middle of a crowd. The police found 14 other missing person cases linked to that same address and timeline. They couldn't prove most of them, but some of those people had simply vanished. Their cars still parked, their wallets still at home. Those cases got reopened. We all dealt with it differently afterward. Blake quit school for a while, terrified of enclosed spaces. Nathan became obsessive about checking behind walls, in attics, anywhere someone could hide. Carlos threw himself into classes but never came to another party again. Josh refused to talk about it at all. And me, I graduated that December, took a job in Colorado inspecting rental properties for a hotel chain. I inspect everything now. Every vent, every crawl space, every floor panel. Because I know how easy it is to miss what's right under your feet. Sometimes horror isn't about ghosts or demons or anything supernatural. Sometimes it's just a person, breathing quietly beneath your floorboards, waiting for you to fall asleep so they can make you part of their twisted collection. Katie eventually recovered physically, but she never came back to school. Melissa said she moved in with her parents in Arizona, went to therapy twice a week, and slept with 3 locks on her bedroom door. The old house was torn down 6 months later. The owner said it was for renovations. But I think he knew no one would ever rent that place again. Now it's just a flat parking lot, smooth and harmless looking, covering the darkness that once hid below, like none of it ever happened.